So, here we are, it's 6:15. We're live right now. This is the General Purposes Licensing Committee. I just wanted to double check. Are we expecting Sanderson and Gant here? You don't know? Okay, that's fine. So, we've done apologies for absence already. Those will be the same as we previously listed. So that's Councillors Clarkson, Humberstone and Coyne. Same as the previous meeting. No other apologies, as far as we know. And any declarations of interest? So we'd like to add formal apologies for Councillors Sanderson and Gant, please.
Should we do Paresh as well?
I've got a feeling he's going to turn up.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's usually
You know what I mean?
work, isn't he, about his time?
Yeah. Anyway, we shouldn't really make apologies for people who haven't themselves, I guess.
Okay.
Anyway, well, let's move on with the agenda. Any declarations of interest for, again, we're looking at the fees and charges and also the consultation that's been done on sustainable street trading. So any... No? Okay, that's perfect. So let's move on. Let's move on to agenda item 3. So that's we've got a report on commercial events, hackney carriage and private hire, road closure orders, scrap metal dealers, sex establishments and street parties, licence fees and charges for 2023-24. And who's going to be presenting the report? Emma Thompson, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to seek the members' agreement on the general purposes licensing fees and charges for the 2023-24 financial year. For the taxi licensing function, following no substantial variation or increase to the taxi licensing fees and charges in the last five financial years, an increase of approximately 5% for both private hire and hackney carriage licence fees for drivers, vehicles and operators are proposed in this report. The increase is proposed to cover the authority's costs due to inflationary pressures and the fact that all fees and charges should reasonably represent the costs of carrying out those functions. All fees and charges, as well as the increase, is attached in Appendix 1 of the report. However, members should be minded to note an introduction of 2 new fees for the following functions. Private hire wheelchair accessible vehicles fee is going to be set at £100, which is cheaper than a normal private hire vehicle fee. This fee offers a discounted fee for the licensing of wheelchair accessible vehicles as private hire vehicles. This is to encourage the private hire sector to license more of these vehicles and ensure the services is accessible in Oxford, as we have seen a shortage of this type of specialist vehicle being licensed. The second additional fee is the online Trust ID checks for disclosure and barring service checks and all right to work checks. The fee is set at £12 for DBS and right to work checks and just £8 for DBS checks. As a licensing authority, we have contracted a provider who is able to verify applicants' ID documents for DBS checks and right to work checks online via a system called Trust ID, which is a secured and Home Office approved provider. Being able to complete the checks online removes the need of face-to-face appointments here at the Town Hall, improves efficiency and allowing checks and ensures less delays for the applicants. For the road closures, including street party applications, sex establishments and sexual entertainment functions, similarly to taxi licensing, following no substantial increase to the road closures and street party applications, as well as sex establishments and sexual entertainment fees and charges within the last 5 financial years, an increase of approximately 5% is proposed to cover the authority's costs due to inflationary pressures. All fees and charges, as well as the increases, is attached to Appendix 1 of the report. For scrap metal dealers and collectors functions, this is an executive function which is a responsibility of the Cabinet. Therefore, the setting of the fees does not fall to this committee. However, the fees for this function, including the 5% increase due to inflationary pressures, can be found in Appendix 1 for members to note. Thank you, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. Are there any questions or comments from the committee, please? Councillor Upton.
Thank you. Could you just clarify about the road closures? So I had a conversation with the person who organises the Christmas market, and she was complaining that they get charged per stall But is that a different charge from the road closure?
Yes, so that's a charge that would be coming under the Licensing Gambling Act fees. That's an temporary event notice application, which can only cover one premises at a time. So each store has to apply for themselves. Obviously, the fee incurred by the event organiser could be recouped back from the store holders, but that isn't in this committee's remit.
Okay, because I just know that equivalent markets in other cities generally do just get charged one licence to cover all
They
of it.
could apply for a
apparently.
premises licence to cover the whole market if that's what they wish to do so. They would have been advised accordingly as to whether they want to do that. The only thing is if they apply for a premises licence, they're then responsible for all sales of alcohol, which is being done by an independent trader. It depends whether the event organiser is happy to be responsible for every single sale of alcohol from every single store.
Okay, I think, but that would be an option.
It would be.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? So, Emma, can I just ask?
Yep.
First question is, are all of our Hackney carriages wheelchair accessible?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. And the £100 fee for wheelchair accessible vehicles,
Yes.
is that just the case whether it's a transfer of vehicle or even a temporary vehicle? Was it
So
going to apply at those different rates?
transfer of vehicle, so change of vehicle, for example, is £100 anyway. So if they transferred the vehicle from one owner to another 6 months through or changed the vehicle 6 months later, that would still be £100. So that's the transfer and change of vehicle fee. It's the licence fee. Instead of paying whatever the licence fee is for private hire, private hire, the proposed charge is going to be 275 or 170 depending on the emissions. If it's a wheelchair accessible vehicle, it will be £100. It's to encourage more wheelchair accessible vehicles because obviously we've only got 107 Hackney carriages and there's quite a massive downturn in wheelchair accessible vehicles, I think, due to the age limits and things. So we're trying to encourage it to be back on the road.
That's good. Yeah, I did actually receive comment recently about this, so I'm really glad to see that.
Yeah, I sit on the Inclusive Transport Board and that's included sometimes that there's a lack of them to do the jobs.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. Diggins? Councillor Diggins, thanks.
I know maybe this would maybe undercut the incentives. Oh, I guess it wouldn't necessarily. Have you given consideration to having again slightly different rates for a wheelchair accessible vehicle with lower emissions? Because could you not get into a situation where those two incentives are cutting across each other?
No, because the low emissions vehicle still costs more than a wheelchair accessible vehicle licence. So you could propose making it slightly cheaper, say a few £20–30 off if it's a low emissions wheelchair accessible vehicle, but I believe they are hard to come by because wheelchair accessible vehicles are normally either MPVs, so the bigger Mercedes Vitos, which don't have low emissions, converted, or are old ambulances that have been then converted into wheelchair accessible vehicles to be used solely. And it's also the amount of the work they do. They are only solely for hospital journeys and special educational needs school runs. They're not going to be used on a Friday, Saturday night when party goers are coming out of the nightclubs per se. They do a little bit more niche market work, which may not be as profitable as your Friday, Saturday night normal working. So they are restricted as to the work they actually do with a wheelchair accessible vehicle.
Because this, sorry, do you mind if I, because this has no bearing on, we've still got sort of overall numbers of each of licensed. Would there be a scenario in which one of these vehicles would end up being used, for example, if there's a shortfall of vehicles on a Saturday night, or is that unlikely? And also, I guess, if these low emissions versions of these vehicles are hard to come by, there wouldn't be that much of a harm from our perspective in offering more of an incentive, and it might. I think.
I mean, it would be dependent on the design of the vehicle, what it's designed to do. If it's designed to hold 2 wheelchairs, it's not going to hold much more than 2 passengers at most on a Friday, Saturday night, because obviously the chairs have been removed to have it wheelchair accessible. It'd obviously be down to the operator. But yeah, we do know there's a shortage of them, especially from the county with the special educational needs school runs. They're needed on the road. So we'll be expecting probably the private hire operators to be licensing these vehicles and then recruiting the drivers to drive them rather than driver owners buying them and then driving them. They are going to be for your specialist operators. We've got a couple on the market that are literally special educational needs journeys, and that's all they do. So they need these vehicles, like I said, not necessarily as profitable as a big operator doing everything. But yeah, we'd expect operators, I would have said, to license these vehicles and then recruit the drivers to drive them.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further? Okay, so the recommendation of officers is to agree to the licence fees and charges for 2023-24. That's in Appendix 1, pages 11 to 13 in the report. So I suggest that we vote to affirm the charges as laid out. Oh, sorry.
Could I suggest an amendment that we consider having a slightly lowered rate
Yeah.
on the off chance that someone does, there is a chance that they can have there is a chance for a low emissions wheelchair vehicle. I just think it makes the charges more, it makes sense if you look at it as well, even if it doesn't, it could have a positive impact.
Okay, so for a low emission vehicle, because we've already got zero charge for an ultra low emission vehicle, so we're talking low emission vehicle. I'm not quite sure exactly what that includes, what vehicles that includes.
Sorry, it would be just as we've got a lower charge for, like a slightly lower charge for a private hire vehicle that's got low emissions, we have a slightly lower charge than the wheelchair accessible ones for wheelchair accessible vehicles that are low emissions. So just like there's a price differential there, we'd have a price differential for that. I just think it makes it more cohesive, if that makes sense.
You'd need to think of a fee, because obviously the difference
Yes.
between a normal private hire and a low emissions private hire is 105. Obviously, they're
Yes.
only paying £100 for the wheelchair accessible vehicle, so you're going to need to think of what sort of discount you would give to a low emissions wheelchair accessible vehicle.
I guess the ways that we could do it were by doing a comparable percentage or by just sort of picking a number that the committee thought was sensible. But I'm also, if people think that this is kind of pointless, then I'm happy to drop it.
I mean, you've put forward the amendment.
Yeah.
If anyone's really good at maths, we could look at the comparison between the low emission vehicle Hackney carriage, the percentage that is of the Hackney carriage, and apply that same percentage. And we could put forward an amendment.
It's 275 for a normal private hire vehicle, and it's 170 for a low emissions private hire vehicle. So the discount is £100, well, £105. You'd have to.
Feel free to put forward the amendment with the price.
But can we have a caveat that can someone check my maths? Sorry, I don't. But anyway, my amendment is that we have a second charge for low emissions wheelchair accessible vehicles, which is £62, which by my mental maths also I think checks out.
So we've got the amendment, roughly there. Would members like to vote on this amendment now? So we'd be voting affirmative, and obviously, we can vote against and so on. So, in favour of the amendment, please. Oh, great. Okay, great. That's unanimous. Very good. So, Emma, do we need to get this drafted in exact wording right now, or?
I will take it back to Anna, because we'll have to obviously add it to the fees and charges, but I believe these fees and charges have to be rubber stamped at another meeting, is that correct? Yeah, so we could take it to that. Ali?
You could draft the amendment and have it, give it to the chair to confirm that that's in accordance with what was said in the meeting.
So the amendment would be under the fees and charges, a low emissions wheelchair accessible vehicle would have a discount of £38 and would be licensed for a fee of £62 then. and that would be an additional new fee on top of the proposed one in this report.
That's right. Yes, please. Thank you. So that's what the committee's voted for. Thank you very much. So we should vote for the amended report. So all those in favour of the report as amended by what we voted for already? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So now we can move on to item 4. That's miscellaneous licensing, fees and charges for 2023-24. We are seeking agreement on the licence fees and charges for 2023-24 as set out in Appendix 1, which is going to be around page 17, 18 on the report. So yeah, 17, 18. So who's presenting this report, please? Nicholas, thank you. Yeah,
I am Chair, thank you very much. The purpose of this report is to seek agreement for the licensing fees and charges that should apply for 2023-2024 for those activities where the Council has discretion. This report does not cover the fees for Licensing Act or the Gambling Act activities, which are reported separately to the Licensing and Gambling Acts Committee. The fees and charges detailed within this report and found at Appendix 1, page 17, relate solely to the functions of the Business Regulation Team. A further report will be provided to the members in relation to the fees and charges related to the functions of the General Licensing Team. The statutory principle in relation to the setting of the fees is that they should be reasonable, proportionate, and not exceed the cost of the procedures and formalities of the relevant licensing scheme, including staffing, training, administration, testing, inspection, hearings, and regulation. The licence fees set by the Council are administered in the miscellaneous licensing function within the Business Regulation Team, comprised of the following areas: acupuncture, ear piercing, electrolysis, tattooing, animal boarding, dangerous wild animals, dog breeding, pavement cafes, pet shops, exhibiting animals, riding establishments, street trading and zoos. Members are asked to note that the fees have been revised and minor increases applied to cover the authority's costs due to the inflationary pressures. In 2020, central government brought in pavement licences under the new temporary provisions in the Business and Planning Act 2020. Originally a 12-month scheme, the pavement licence provision has subsequently been extended twice and currently runs until September 2023. The mandatory £100 fee set by the government is insufficient to meet service costs. In the event that the provisions are not extended beyond that date, the pre-existing street cafe provisions would be the only way to gain permission for outdoor tables and chairs. It is therefore proposed that in the event that the pavement licence provisions are not extended beyond September 2023, fees for street cafe licence be amended from a single charge of £100 to reflect the numbers of tables and chairs applied for. The proposed fees are set out in Appendix A. The Council is responsible for collecting licence fees for these functions, and predicted income from licence fees is included in the Council's budget estimates for 2023-2024. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. So are there any comments or questions from the committee for Nicholas on this report? Yeah, Councillor Mundyman.
Thank you, Chair. Just a query. I note in Appendix A on page 17 that the percentage increase for the charges at the top for city centre and late night traders are in the region of sort of 1 to 1.5%. For us everywhere else, it's 4 up to 10. So I just wondered what the reason was for such a small increase for those particular ones.
Councillor, I think for city centre and late night traders, that's just a small increase, whereas some of the other larger increases further down the page are due to one-off charges. So something like a tattoo or piercing are around the 7% mark, which is a one-off charge.
Yes, I see that, the miscellaneous ones at the bottom, but elsewhere there are general charges sort of going up by 5%, events 9%, 10%. I thought it was notable that the ones at the top were very, very small increases, and they seem very different to the others. Is there? I just wanted to know if there's a reason. No.
Other than obviously we're aware of the pressures on business going forward.
Okay. Are you satisfied with the response, Councillor Mudman?
Well, I don't understand. Well, I understand your response, but I don't understand it because you're aware of pressure on business. But why pick these ones in particular to have a smaller increase than the others? I just don't understand the justification.
Sorry, I'm not part of Nicholas's team, but the premises that you're talking about there actually do hold a licence with the Licensing Act 2003, so they actually have to have a premises licence to cover the sale of hot food and drink between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. So technically they have to apply for 2 licences from 2 different departments. So we can't increase ours under legislation, but obviously having 2 fees means they probably wouldn't want to increase theirs too much with the incurring of another fee from a different department.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions, comments? Yeah, Councillor Dunn.
I just wanted a bit of clarification on what the licensing functions we have around animal boarding, dangerous wild animals, dog breeding, pet shops and exhibiting animals. Could you give me some more information on that? I don't...
They are very small concerns, and some of them we don't actually get involved with. But they are there for the reason that if they are applied for, that we are able to charge them.
Okay, so we do have the ability to have those as... Okay, because I've seen somewhere that we ban the sale of animal fur and tobacco. Like, is there a way that that can be extended, or is that... I don't know how some of those items that can be agreed when they're obviously, exhibiting wild animals, and it seems a bit...
I think they're a regulatory function that can be applied for, so I'm assuming that we need to provide that as part of our function.
Okay.
Unless otherwise directed.
Clarify, thank you, on a similar point. So under which policy then specifically, if we were to maybe propose restrictions under these regulated areas, which I think the councillor is maybe suggesting could be considered, you know, hypothetically, where would that fall? Because is there a specific policy that would need to be created, or would that fall under an existing one if these were areas that we wanted? Just for instance, we have with the casino, the no casino policy under Gambling Act. You know, if there was a, I think and please correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're suggesting that we wanted to say there was no zoo policy for Oxford City Centre, you know, very hypothetically, you know, would that be feasible, and if so, under what policy? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a good question. I think it would have to go out to consultation, and then the relevant policy be applied. Currently, it sits within this policy, so miscellaneous or street trading policy. So that would have to be reviewed, which it just has been reviewed.
If it's not too much trouble with an interesting question like we've just had, would the committee be able to get a sort of more fulsome response on in relation to what the sort of potential capacity is for us to make these kind of decisions about limiting these kind of licences? And it could either be addressed to me as chair, or we could discuss it at the next committee meeting, which is in May. Councillor Ligo.
Wouldn't that have to be discussed before then, because it has to go to Budget Council?
Alison?
Regardless.
Well, it's a question that is really outside of the report, because this is specifically about fees and charges. So it's obviously extremely important question. So I was just trying to think of a mechanism that allowed the report to go forward potentially, or whatever your decision is when you have your vote, but also allowed your question to be answered. So I don't think
in answer to your question, Councillor Ligo, I don't think the answer to that question would, if it's a statutory function that is allowed by the council, which it clearly is at this stage, then this would be the fee that would be applied. Your question, which would be looking at the policy and the reasons behind accepting those kind of applications, I think would be separate and outside of the report, and that we could therefore wouldn't be bringing about an amendment that you'd be voting on tonight. Does that answer your question, Councillor Ligo?
Sorry, thank you. I don't want to stay off topic, but when would we be able to review that? Will there be a future meeting where we can actually...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it has to be.
Yeah,
go ahead.
We've got the AGM the same day in May, 18th of May, I think it is, which happens to be the next meeting of this committee.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further comments or questions on the report? Understanding that, as we said, this isn't going to be an amendment. This is about communicating what can be done for a future meeting. So if there aren't any more comments or questions, then we'll move to a vote on the fees and charges as laid out on page 17 of the report, Appendix 1. So all those in favour of agreeing to the recommendation of approving this report? That's unanimous. Okay, so we move on to agenda item 5. This is the consultation on responses for the proposed final version of the revised Street Trading Policy 2023. We've also been referring to this as the Sustainable Street Trading Policy. Now, who is presenting this report?
That's me. Once
Thank you, Nicholas. Yes, please do.
Thank you, Chair. At its meeting on the 30th of November 2022, the General Purposes Licensing Committee approved the draft Street Trading Policy Consultation version presented to it, subject to amendments to be made by the Principal Lead Officer in consultation with the Chair of the General Licensing Purposes Committee. These amendments were made and a public consultation subsequently was carried out between the 12th of December 2022 and the 13th of January 2023. A report on the consultation is attached at Appendix A. As the report shows, nearly 100 online representations were received from members of the public, groups and street traders. In general, more respondents supported each of the changes covered in the consultation questions than respondents who did not. Most respondents gave contact details and permission for officers to respond to their inquiries and inform them of the outcomes from the consultation. On the 14th of January 2023, the government announced plans for a ban on single-use plastic plates, trays, bowls, cutlery and balloon sticks, and certain types of polystyrene cups and food containers. The ban would be introduced from October 2023, allowing businesses time to prepare draft regulations to be enforced by county councils in England have been published. From October, businesses will not be able to supply these products to customers, and this includes retailers, takeaways, food vendors, and the hospitality industry. However, the ban does not apply to plates and trays and bowls that are used as packaging in shelf-ready, pre-packaged food items. The announcement states that, for example, it would include pre-packaged salad bowls and bowls filled with food at the counter of a takeaway. The emerging legislation and guidance is likely to be relevant to the street trading policy and business regulation team officers will monitor their progress and advise members and the trade if they become aware that further changes to the policy are needed. Several respondents asked about the implementation of this requirement, given that some street trading locations are better provided with public litter bins than others. Whilst officers consider that the provision of a trader-located bin is likely to help reduce street litter, the committee may wish to consider the requirement that only applies when there is an existing public litter bin within 20 metres. To assist the committee, a potential amendment would be that Annex 1, Condition 17 is amended to read as follows. The consent holder shall take reasonable steps to ensure that litter arising from their own trade is minimised as far as possible, including by making a bin available for customers to use where a public litter bin is not available within 20 metres from their vehicle. The current proposed implementation date for the revised street trading policy 2023 is the 1st of April 2023. However, the proposed ban on the use of single-use plastics and polystyrene is likely to require some traders to change how they present items for sale to obtain new stock and perhaps new suppliers. They may wish also to use up existing stock items and materials. As noted in section 3.6 of the consultation report, it was a repeated concern that time should be allowed to comply with the new requirements. The current street trading policy was introduced 6 months after publication, thereby allowing traders time to comply with the then new requirements concerning recycled packaging. Members may wish to recommend to Council a similar 6-month delay, specifically for the new requirements in section 6.6. The proposed final version of the revised street trading policy is set out at Appendix B. There are no changes to the ban on the sales of e-cigarettes and plastics and helium balloons and sky lanterns, which were proposed in the consultation version that are contained in paragraph 6.5. The potential post-consultation changes referred to in this report at section 6.6, Annex 1, Condition 17 in the policy are highlighted by means of a shaded background in order to assist members to identify them in context. The shading will be removed before publication. Members are requested to endorse the Street Trading Policy 2023 final draft at Appendix B and to recommend the endorsed policy to Council for adoption with effect from the 1st of April 2023. The section 6.6 single-use plastics to take effect on the 1st of October 2023. The Council is entitled to make reasonable charges for its licensing services based on the costs of performing those functions. The Street Trading Policy Review 2022-2023 is expected to deliver a policy which will enhance the operation and management of the street trading services so that fee income is proportionate to cost. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. So I believe the report was put together by David Stevens. So we've already got, Councillor Diggins, so I'm taking comments and questions. I'll go with Councillor Diggins, then I'll go with Councillor Ligo, then I'm going to go with Councillor Miles, and then Lois Mudderman. Can we take 3 at a time? So we'll go, Councillor... You got 3 questions? Okay, let's go. Let's go for it.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much. I have a few things. One of them is about the bins issue, and it's not just that I think it's even more unfair if it's sort of like, depends where you are geographically and location for a city council bin. I think, you know, if we're basically providing bins to some traders, we should either provide them to the others or remove the requirement. And my other problem with the bins is that I feel, so when traders are, I'm trying to think of how this is actually going to work in practice. So when traders are replacing their existing single-use plastic stock, and I did some great research about what different types of polystyrene are, it's a fascinating afternoon, they're going to probably replace them with comparable things. Either those are things we're going to want to recycle rather than put in a litter bin, because that's how we get more recycled plastic, or they are probably going to use some of that fun new stuff which is made from like potato starch. Actually, that's maybe not potato, but you know the stuff I mean, that's not plastic, that is biodegradable. Things that are biodegradable that are put in landfill actually have a terrible, terrible, terrible impact on the environment, and I think there is not much point, basically, doing this policy unless we can be quite sure, or at least people have a viable opportunity to put those things in somewhere where they will biodegrade into something resembling compost, for example. So I'm a bit worried about essentially the point of this policy, if what's actually going to end up happening is we have things that look like plastic but are actually biodegradable. Sure, they're not leaching microplastics into the environment, but they're still going to be sitting there producing noxious gases and contributing to our landfill, and that's not actually doing anything much better for the environment. So this isn't an attack on you, this is just kind of a more general question about it. And then I guess on the back of that, I just wonder how bin collections already work for street traders. Do they leave trade bags outside and they're collected by the council as part of the industrial waste team? Because I think that's another thing to consider, especially if they are mobile, like a lot of the kebab vans, for example. And then finally, sorry, I had a lot of questions on this one. I think it said only 2 of the street traders got back on this. Is it possible to get a breakdown of, and I know there are 2 objections to some of them, and I wondered if those 2 objections were maybe the 2 street traders. It would be really useful to get a breakdown of responses by category, if that's something you can do within the bounds of GDPR. I don't see why it wouldn't be, because it's not protected information as I understand it. And also to understand kind of what efforts were made to reach out to existing street traders to find out about, you know, what they thought, given that 2 as part of the official consultation to me seems quite low, but it might have been that they responded informally or fed in other ways to the policy. Really sorry, that was a lot of questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nicholas, have you got those? Are you happy to answer?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the first one, it was very difficult to find a solution for the waste issue. And that's what we thought was a amicable solution. And yes, it may cause possibly unfairness and an extra layer of management in respect of what people were going to do, but that seemed to be the most obvious solution to provide that. Obviously, if that's not acceptable, then we may have to go back and have a look at that. But I think that's the solution that we came up with after all the consultation and the feedback from that report. And you know, we did speak to traders as well. So that's the first one. The second one is all about waste streams, and that is very difficult as well for the collection of. So there are provision in the city, or there is provision in the city for different waste streams and collections, things like coffee, oil-based coffee cups and things like that. And we did touch on that discussion about how we could best educate the public to use those facilities, but there is nothing in place that we could use right now other than their own waste collection, trade waste collection. So I understand what you're saying, but I don't think there is a provision for us to be able to change that, other than their own trade waste licenses.
Can I just follow up on that one quickly? I guess on that, I mean, if we're thinking about the obligation to have bins, I think from my perspective, and it might be that other people will disagree, I think this is really impractical, I would prefer there to be, if this is possible, an obligation on all street traders to have, I mean, they would need both because you need to sort them out, but to have like a food waste bin, basically, that they could put their biodegradable rubbish into. And if it's, you know, I don't know, I think that's quite important for me for the functioning of this policy, but other people may disagree with me.
I'll let you finish answering the questions, Nicholas.
Yeah, that could be a solution. It's I think moving forward, which is what we're trying to do as a council, but it would need to go out for further discussion. And third was.
I just had a question about how bin collections work, but I think that's through the business waste, the commercial waste collection, isn't it? They use the little plastic bags on the street like other traders. Oh, sorry. They use the specially coloured plastic bags and leave them out on the street. Is that right?
Yeah, it depends what contract they have and which provision with which provider. Yeah. And some of them have their own waste carrier licenses.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think you covered the question about the consultation earlier in saying you were working with the traders in the production of the document, is that right?
Sorry?
You working with the traders sort of outside the bounds of the official consultation document, as it were?
So we did contact. So contact was made to some of the traders, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to Councillor Ligo. How many questions have you got? No.
6.
You aren't joking. Well, okay, so we'll go Councillor Ligo's one question, then Councillor Miles, I believe, was next if you've got a couple of questions. We'll take Councillor Ligo's question first.
Councillor Diggins has raised what I was going to raise, but this leads me on to general conditions for street trade and contents 17. How many street traders do we have near the town hall? The reason I ask is because there's 2 smoke bins outside, if you see where I'm coming from. Because of the 20 metres. Do you know how many we have? No. Okay, because my point was probably not best to be addressed here, but I've raised it in lots of venues, lots of meetings, is that the 2 bins we have outside the town hall, we're trying to be a smoke-free council by 25, and we're leading on this with city and county and other districts, and we have 2 smoke bins right outside the town hall, and we should be leading by example. But my question was, I know this is for another meeting, to raise it, but there are food waste that goes in there. That's why I asked about the 20 metres from the street trading. I didn't know where the 2 bins were positioned, where the 20 metres was. And if that was the case, what would happen if those bins disappeared? How that would impact the policy?
Can we take Councillor Miles? Just quick, can we do them? We're trying to do 3 at a time, if that's okay, just for ease of. Is that all right? So if we go to Councillor Miles, and then we can do the questions together.
It's a clarification on the conditions. So in terms of conditions 28 and 29, we have the condition around consent holders must not use, sell or distribute single-use plastic, but then in 29, which is specific to food traders, it refers to all packaging and utensils for use by customers shall be made of recycled or part recycled materials. Now, I just wondered whether there needed to be a cross-reference between the 2 to the specific point about the single-use plastic in that in condition number 29. Would it make sense to just do a cross-reference between the 2?
Thank you. So, have you got those questions, Nicholas? You ready? Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In response to the 20 metre, we'd have to work it out. So I'd need to refer back.
Follow up.
Just a quick follow-up. What I would like, if possible, is those bins to be removed. Then if it impacts on any of these street traders with a 20 metre policy, then just to deal with that, because that's one of our policies, is having a smoke-free Oxford by 2025.
There's looking at the impact of removal of our own bins on.
Yeah,
on
it's
the
just 'cause I'm
yeah.
And then in answer to your question, Councillor, so yes, there could be a cross-reference between the 2.
So is it that they also need to be, so is it a requirement in the policy as it currently stands that they not only need to be not single-use plastic but also need to be made of recycled materials?
Yeah, I believe that's the proposition.
Could I, I'm going to add another suggested amendment to my little stack. Could we just remove that? Because I feel like it covers it in the single-use plastic, and actually it might be unnecessarily limiting to have the recycled materials, and sometimes recycled materials might be worse than some of the other alternatives, because from my understanding that would preclude, for example, biodegradable packaging. Does that make sense? I mean again, I'll propose that later, but that's I'll add that to the list of things for later, but that was my follow-up from, yeah.
Okay. Follow up from Councillor Miles.
I mean, I think it was just really a clarification. I think that under the old conditions, we had recycled and part recycled, which was, and clause number 29, condition number 29 is left over from the previous one. And so actually the single-use plastic clause that condition that we're adding is, in my understanding, was sort of replacing that, but it was just inconsistent in the text. And just maybe to clarify on this point, my understanding is that what we're doing is going a step further than what the government is proposing in its October requirements, but I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's national legislation that's coming in October about single-use plastics. Nicholas, yeah, sorry.
So, scrap 29.
But I'd like to take all the comments and questions first. So, Councillor Muddiman, your questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small issue on page 40, item 15.2, which says trading at charity or small events where the proceeds of the event are to be used solely or charitably or community purposes are exempt from the council's street trading requirements. And I think you mentioned it when you were further up the document, we were talking about the consultation. I think it's a little unclear whether that is exempt from the fee or exempt from the requirements of following the policy. So in 15.2, is it exemption from the fee?
Exemption from the fee, but not the policy's requirements.
Well, I would read what's currently there as exemption from the policy. So I think we need to add some wording to say exemption from the fee, not from the requirement of the policy. That was the main one. Then one, just in the timing, point 3 at the beginning, bringing this in October, and whether we need to delay until October, and whether we can bring this in at the bit about single-use plastic at the same time as all the other requirements in the policy. So that's another request, that we don't delay this bit about single-use plastics till October, that we do that in April. Those are mine.
Yeah, Nicholas, yeah.
So I think from the policy consultation, there was quite a lot of discussion and views were made that they would like to have time to implement the policy.
Okay, can you whereabouts in the consultation bit is that?
So it's 3.6, page 27. There were 32 responses to this part of the question covering a wide range of topics. Repeated concerns that single-use plastics measures would take some time to use the speaker, please. Sorry, so 3.6, page 27. There were 32 responses to this part of the question covering a wide range of topics. A repeated concern was that the single-use plastic measures would take some time to comply with, given that most traders will have stock to use up and may need to find new suppliers. One of the quotes was, "It's important that these changes are done in a way to minimise the hit to small independent businesses have to take, making sure they have enough time, information and support to adapt."
Okay, thank you. Just when it says, I understand there were 32 responses, but it doesn't say that all those 32 had that concern. Was the repeated concern by how many?
I don't actually have that figure here. That would have been part of the earlier draft reports.
Just to clear up for you, Councillor Muddiman, David Stevens has got a copy of that draft if we do need to see it. I'll take Councillor Rule first because she hasn't asked a question yet.
Thank you. It was just following up, thank you, Chair, on the same point actually, to sort of, I think, challenge the suggestion that it's necessary to delay it to October, the single-use plastics part of the policy, since especially there were only 2 street traders that did respond to this consultation, and I would have expected that if there was uproar and fear that this was coming in far too soon, we would have had far more street traders respond to the consultation, and it would be much clearer that that's a really strong requirement. And I also question whether it was so specific that they were saying we must hold out to October, another 5 months is what we need, especially when the rest of the requirements will come in April and traders have to be ready for those. So why specifically are we taking single plastics out? to my mind, it's because as stated, the suggestion is that it's because the law will come in then anyway. My counter to that is that the people already know the law is coming in and therefore are probably already preparing to some extent, so why not let us lead on this and bring it right as far forward as we can and save on 5 months worth of single-use plastics rotting our planet, would be my push.
Fair enough. I will take Councillor Miles's question as well, so we can do them in groups again. Thanks.
Yeah, and this is just on this point, that's why I come in here. I just wanted to remind us all, when we brought the motion to the council, we had a couple of speakers speak on the point that even today, on the existing clause, a condition within the street trading policy where it says recycled and part recycled, there was a window of opportunity where they could use up existing stock, and people are still apparently have been claiming that they're still using up existing stock, and it was a street trader that spoke on that point to us at council. So I would be inclined to agree with the proposals that the councillors have just set before us, that we bring in the requirement in line with the April. We've still got time, and we've still got a few months before that. I'll just leave it there, but just to think of what was shared with us in that meeting.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions to put to Nicholas in this round of questions? Mark Clagger.
Sorry. Can I ask Nicholas and Emma a question? If that is an amendment, is this realistic, getting back to the street traders and any sort of reputational damage? Yes, I know we've got to think about the climate and everything else, you know, why wait? But being realistic, I mean, it's unfortunate only 2 street traders came forward, and if it was that important, then we would have had more. You know, why April, why not March? Or, you know, is it like a 3-month leading in time? What's your advice? Although it's up to the committee to make the decision, but I just wanted an officer's point of view, please.
Can I just make one quick point? So I know that 2 respondents did say they were street traders, but we did have a number of respondents that didn't declare any level of interest at all. So we can't say with absolute certainty there were only 2 street traders responding. So Nicholas and if Emma want to respond to those points as well.
I suppose, first of all, we've done it historically to phase it in. 2, it would align with the legislation that's coming at the same time. They're the only 2 reasons, really.
Sorry, don't want to complicate this. There's 2 ways you could look at this. You could say, let's get ahead of the curve. Okay, the government says that we're going taking a step further, and just being realistic there. What sort of extra workload does it put on officers? Is this as straightforward? Can we say actually April is realistic and we can do it?
In respect of enforcing, you mean? Well, yeah, it is realistic. But I would say that it would be easier operationally to phase it in and give us some time to adjust. But that's just my bias as sort of delivering the operations.
Okay, are there any further comments or responses from yourself, Nicholas, or Emma, if you wanted to? Do you have any comments on this? No? So I'm ready to sort of summarise these. We've got a couple of amendments. Are there any further comments? Councillor Miles.
This is a separate point. It's with reference to 14.1 and markets on page 40. I realise that the other markets or fairs are out of scope of this policy, but I wondered whether, in absence of a markets policy, which we discussed I think at the last policy meeting, whether something could be added which states we would encourage markets to be following some of the guidance within here. So there's some sort of language encouraging alignment, even if they aren't obliged to follow this policy. I'm not sure whether that's feasible. Well, if it is.
I'll take Councillor Diggins on that.
I don't know whether that would be. I think if if we want this to apply to markets, we should, I don't know, I think I was probably ill, probably with COVID the last time we had this discussion, but I would want that to be in a separate, I think putting it here seems out of place and seems to kind of almost emphasise that there's a difference, which is the opposite of what we want to come across. Does that make sense? I mean, I get what you're saying, but I think we'd want to make it enforceable and part of a policy rather than showing that there's, yeah.
Okay, so the question from Councillor Miles was whether that kind of caveat could be put in that part. The answer is?
I don't think it sits there. I think it'd be very difficult to instigate or enforce or... Yeah.
Okay, are there any further comments? Okay, so I've got two sort of substantive amendments that I've kind of gleaned from what people have said. So if I've got this wrong, just do let me know. So we've got a suggestion for the removal of section 29, which is the stipulation that traders use recycled or part recycled materials. All packaging utensils used, but we've got the amendment would be to remove that section of the policy. The second amendment, different amendment, is that we would not be prepared to have the policy only enforceable in October, and we'd expect it to be enforced from April. Right. Do we have any comments purely about those amendments, or if there's another amendment that I've missed?
I had an amendment to add to the bin requirements that they have a food waste bin.
Oh, yeah. That's fine. Yeah, so we'd be saying food waste bin at every store.
Unless it's 1 in 20 metres, which I think is a lot, but if they're 20 metres, same rule but with a food waste bin.
Yeah. Okay. Right, so that's...
And maybe a recycling bin as well. Now getting excessive, but I do just think there's not much point having this policy if we don't also have recycling facilities.
We'll put that in the same amendment. Okay. I'm going to take Councillor Ligo, whose hand was up first.
And following on from Catherine Miles, on that amendment, what we would need if we're going to adopt that again in, did we say April?
Well, that's one of the...
But use that sort of softly approach when on enforcement. You know, it's about education first rather than going straight in, if that's possible. Use a bit of common sense in that leading in time. And we're not putting it in there, but I'm just saying for officers to report back to the enforcement team.
Okay. We've got a comment from Councillor Upton.
The idea of providing lots of separate bins at the kebab shop at the kebab van for people to use at 2 a.m. I'm not sure how valuable that is. I mean, I think our city centre bins that people just use during the day, if we have a separate recycling and a separate waste one, I think the contents of the two are almost identical. I think if anything, it sort of messes up the recycling because it's just got lots of waste in it. So before we start asking vans to provide 3 separate bins, I think I'd want to know that there was a point to doing that. So I don't know, do you have any feedback from ODS about how well separated waste and recycling usually are between 2 bins if people are given a choice? And then giving a third choice as well, I think could make it even more complicated. I mean, absolutely, we should have that and people should sort it, but there's no point doing it if it won't work.
Maybe take away the recycling one, because I think there is, I think there's quite a high likelihood that the switches that seem to be being made more broadly are switches towards biodegradable packaging. So if you have biodegradable packaging with biodegradable food in it and they all end up in the same bin and it's a food waste bin, that's not a problem. So I removed my recycling suggestion. That was wishful thinking.
Okay.
Are there any comments from the officers on Councillor Upton's point on potentially spoiling the food waste collections?
We didn't have much response on the consultation or any comments in relation to that.
Okay, thank you. So, any further comments on the amendments, as we've seen 3 that I've named?
You haven't listed the one about changing the wording in 15.2 to make it clear that it's exemption from the fee, not from following the policy.
That's true. Yeah, sorry about that. So that's for charities and community organisations, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you have a suggestion of wording for that one then, Councillor Muddyman, or anybody raise your hand?
Remove the word requirements and replace it with fees, I think.
Yeah.
Are there any others I've missed? You've got comments on, yeah?
Thank you, Chair. It was just to follow on Councillor Diggins' proposal. I was not to get too into the nitty-gritty, but I was just thinking about the difference between street traders who like provide food rather than other items, and actually it might be like odd to request that someone who doesn't sell food has to have a compostable bin. So maybe it might be specific to those traders, perhaps, if that was going to be a requirement. And then second, I was just going to suggest perhaps another way of the kind of softly educational approach might also be within, I know we spoke last time about having guidance attached to the environmental sustainability concerns that we look at when we grant licenses, and that could perhaps be one of them, trying to move people towards like having a recyclable bin if you have items that are recyclable containers, plastics instead. So perhaps there's sort of a soft recommendation there that as part of that environmental consideration, we add in that recyclable element of bin, like encouraging people to have recyclable bins if they can. And then the second thing is the specifics about it being food compostable, if you're happy with that change to the amendment.
Sorry, Chad. I think maybe David Curtis from ODS, maybe someone to ask these specific technical questions.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, just on Councillor Diggins' point about the bins, prior to initially putting forward the motion on sustainable street trading, I contacted someone that works in this field, who's an advisor at the university, and the feedback around the litter bins was that actually the primary reason for having a litter bin next to the street traders is actually to avoid litter, rather than the recycling of the packaging that comes from as an impact of the street trading. And the second point was that there's a lot of, I think to Councillor Upton's point, there's a lot of contamination that occurs of the packaging that is used, regardless of whether it's single-use plastic, biodegradable, whatever the packaging, because of the nature of it having food in it. And actually, the facilities that exist to then sort and process that waste are actually quite limited, and it's a relatively small amount. So I would propose that we stick with just a litter bin with the primary purpose of addressing the negative impact of street trading, which can be litter, and minimising that, and then we're addressing the packaging issue through the single-use ban that we're proposing. So they're two separate issues with two slightly different solutions. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll just, okay, so raise your hands for final points on this now. So I've got Councillor Diggins. Has anyone else got any final points? Yeah, okay, thanks.
I think my point, I'm sorry, is I sort of don't really see the point of having a ban on single-use plastics if they're not being, the things that are replacing them aren't being disposed of properly, because it's still having a majorly negative impact on not the local environment and aesthetics, which I see as a litter problem, but the environment in the sense of the climate crisis and greenhouse gases. And I think contamination issues when it comes to food waste, if it's biodegradable and it ends up in the food waste and it's covered in food and it gets sent to an industrial compost plant, my understanding is it all becomes compost in the end anyway. So scrap the recycling bin, but I still really think that having some kind of food waste bin requirement is needed, not to address the litter component, but to be the other side of this policy being workable. I feel quite strongly about that, unless the research that the person conducted showed that it's still going to have a major impact without a way to make sure that a lot of these things don't end up in landfill.
Okay, so we do have 4 amendments there. I mean, so obviously we have conducted the consultation, as has been reported, and the amendment on the food waste bin was not something that the public had a chance to respond to in relation to what the traders were going to have to do. In terms of timing, the consultation respondents were looking at a policy that was going to be brought in October. In relation to the fees, as we've seen in the report, there was some confusion about the obligations on charities and community organisations. So that, to me, that does seem like a very reasonable amendment in relation to the consultation, how the public responded to this. And also with the removal of section 29 on the recycled, part recycled packaging, because I believe that was part of the original motion that you put forward. And so it's a bit of a surprise, I think, that that was actually in there, because you had requested that that wouldn't be in there. That's my understanding. That was the first thing. So just to give a bit of clarity to that, now, the committee, I believe, now really should be voting on each of these 4 amendments. Yeah? Okay, so let's go we'll go with Councillor Diggins, your first point on all the street traders who are more than 20 metres away from a food waste bin need to provide their own food waste bin in the same way that they would have had to provide a litter bin. So we'd be raising our hands in favour of that amendment as proposed by Councillor Diggins. Is this a point or is it...
Sorry, my suggestion was to amend the proposal that it's just food.
Yeah, I've taken the recycled thing out, so just the food waste, just the food waste. Yeah, sure. Of course, Alison has a point.
I just think we should be very clear which aspect of the policy that's gone out to consultation you're actually amending. So is this is under the Annex 1, page 43, 17. You're amending that wording, and is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's a good point.
To clarify that.
We could. Yeah. So
agree the wording that is proposed and then voted upon.
That's fair. Yeah. So Councillor Diggins, looking at point 17, have you got? Okay. So if you can quickly tell us how you would suggest that be amended in terms of the wording of that particular section of the policy. Okay, does that sound like, can we get that sort of wording wise if the committee was to vote for that amendment? Does that sound like?
It's my understanding that that would need, I mean, maybe it's not within the scope of this, which case I'll withdraw it, but it's my understanding that Nicholas's perspective, which I would agree with, was that would need to have further consultation with food traders.
So if I was a food trader and I've got a food bin for my trade waste and for the customers around my area, and then somebody walks past and throws something else in it, which then becomes contaminated waste and spoiled and then goes to landfill. I'm not sure how that works in respect of what the impact is for everybody within that environment. Does that work? Would you stop people from putting things in your bin?
Alison,
Well, the question, I think, to you was whether or not it would have to go back out to consultation if that was actually voted upon and agreed by as a viable amendment.
Yes, I think is the question, is the answer.
So we'd be voting on that amendment and that it would go out to consultation for a further consultation, basically, with that amendment. So are we clear on the wording? I know we haven't got exact wording there, but we're clear on the inclusion of the... Yeah? So if that was agreed, it could be drafted for consultation going back to the public, if agreed. So, do we have any comments on that, on the vote on this amendment?
Just that I propose that I'm going to vote against that amendment because A, I don't want to delay the policy and go out for further consultation, and B, Councillor Miles's point about that the bins beside the street traders are predominantly for litter, and that there is always going to be it's always going to be very difficult to have pure recycling and separation of waste. So I will urge people to vote against so that we can pass this without further consultation.
Okay, thank you for that submission. So I propose we move to a vote.
Yeah, I'm happy to defer this until discussions when we look at like renewing the policy next year or adjusting it next year.
So you want to scrap it? You don't want
Yes.
Yeah.
'Cause I think
Okay. So that's been withdrawn. That's fine. So now we will vote on the. I'm going to call this amendment number 2. Apologies if it's not in exactly the right order, but we will vote on all of them. So section 29, removal of section 29, which it says all packaging utensils used by customers must be made of recycled or part recycled material. So are there any sort of quick comments in relation to voting on that amendment to remove that section 29? So if we're voting in favour of removing that section 29. Okay, thank you very much. That's unanimous. Okay. So the third amendment, as I'm sort of writing them down here, is in relation to the charities. That's 15.2. And the rewording so that it says fees instead of, I can't find it, requirements, yeah. So that's a very simple change in wording, and I understand that's acceptable to you as who proposed it. So a simple change of wording there. Are there any comments on voting on that amendment? Okay, so if we're voting in favour, we're voting in favour of changing the word requirements to the word fees, so it's clear that the charities are exempt from the fees rather than the actual contents of the policy. Are you voting, or are you? Yeah, I'm voting. Great. Okay, all in favour? Good. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Then, okay, now what I'm calling the fourth amendment is the timing. So we do have a proposal to bring this policy in April and have it enforceable from April, although the consultation did imply to the respondents that this would be brought in October. But those who, are there any comments?
So can I clarify that? My understanding is that the policy did recommend that this would come in, all of it would come in April. I don't think it was, in the consultation, I think respondents were aware that it would come in April. Can I clarify that? Not October.
So my understanding was that it was enforced from October. So it would come into place in April and enforced from October. Madam, sorry, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. A question is, just to repeat what Rosie said, Councillor Rawls said, when it went out to consultation, were the people informed that that would be the case, that we would be bringing the policy in on at the beginning of April, but we wouldn't be enforcing one particular bit of it until the start of October? Or were they told the policy would be enforced from April?
I think the dialogue was that we talked around supporting traders, but not suggesting any implementation time as part of the consultation.
Okay, so it would be possible to bring this in from the 1st of April without going against anything that we said in the consultation.
I'll take that comment, that's fine. Are there any further comments on the amendment? So we will, okay, so we're voting now, we're voting in favour of having that enforceable, the amended policy with the single-use plastics requirement, that being enforceable when the policy is brought in, day one, on the beginning of April when it's been brought in and approved by full council. So all those in favour of that amendment? Against? Carried. So are we able to make the change in relation to the vote by the committee there? Is that? So the wording would be clear that this is enforceable from the beginning of April.
Yes, if I have no other advice.
I'd like to
sorry,
defer
I'm
to
getting, I
our-
might have, I just may have confused myself, so it's just that we have clarity amongst the committee, is that actually, if we go back to the officer's report, the recommendation that is made by the officer is that the subcommittee recommends the endorsed policy to council for adoption with effect from 1st of April, but with section 5.9, which is single-use plastics, to take effect from 1st of October. So actually you would need to amend that recommendation rather than an amendment to the report itself, because to the policy itself doesn't use that wording. It actually just has a... So it isn't actually an amendment to the policy. It's actually a changing of the wording to your own recommendation, to the recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay? So your recommendation to council would be that it would take, the policy takes effect in its entirety from April.
Okay, does everyone understand what Alison's just said? So I'm not saying this because I don't agree with it. I do think we should vote again in relation to what she's just said. So please, understanding that specifically the amendment is to that recommendation, whereas previously we've been talking about amendments to the policy. All those in favour of the amendment, please? Oh. Yes. It's up to you. No. Okay, so it's the same. We've got the same hands up.
Sorry.
That's all right. No, and all those against? Okay, so it's carried. It's carried quite convincingly, really. So I believe we've got all the amendments done there. Any comments or questions from Nicholas? Because I appreciate that was quite complicated.
No, Chair.
Apologies for how, it's been a fulsome debate about the whole issue. So, as amended, and with the amendments that we've put forward for the street trading policy, the amendment to the recommendation that we've just voted on, we will now take a vote on the report. All those in favour of noting the report and accepting the revised street trading policy? That's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. So we can move on to agenda item 6. Minutes of the previous meeting. We've had a meeting on the 26th of September 2022. We also had an extraordinary meeting held on 30th of November where we discussed the street trading policy. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the minutes? And can we vote on approving those minutes from the previous meeting?
Agreed.
Oh, sorry, I had a question on the minutes. Sorry,
Please.
just one quick one for Louise. Actually, I think I've written it down. It's on page 51 in the minutes, point 11. I just wondered if there'd been any progress on, is this the appropriate time to, yes, to ask whether there's been any progress? Yeah? Sorry, okay. To ask if there'd been any progress on, there was a request from the chair of this committee, i.e. Ed, to call on the cabinet member for health and transport, i.e. Louise, to see if there were, to work with stakeholders about providing electric power points and e-vehicles. So, do you remember that?
I do remember that. I did send off one email to, I think to Andrew Downs about putting things onto pavements. I've actually got to catch up with our EV team coming up in a week or two, so I will ask them.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we look forward to further updates from our cabinet member, Councillor Upton. So yeah, can we vote on the minutes? Any inaccuracies in the minutes? If not, then we vote to approve the minutes.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So we'll move on to agenda item 7. So we're looking at the dates and times of future meetings. The AGM, 18th of May. Oh,
Sorry.
okay, that's handy then. So all the future dates of meetings have been noted then by the committee. So then we can close the meeting. Thank you for your time today, everybody.
Video what?
Sorry guys, I just need to very quickly reconvene because Celeste has just pointed out to me that we didn't vote on both the minutes. So so I didn't separate the two meetings. So just to be clear, people have had an opportunity please to comment on both of those meetings, the extraordinary meeting of 30th of November included. So any comments or concerns, inaccuracies in 30th of November? Can we please vote to approve the minutes 30th of November extraordinary meeting?
Fine.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, guys. Yeah, thanks.